if that's okay with you, Patricia. Okay, well, first of all, thank you so much for joining us in this Zoom meeting. We have Patricia Dawson, who is a candidate for mayor here in the city of Riverside, and currently she serves as a school board member for the Riverside Unified School District. So let's start talking about that. How long have you been in the school board? And before that, what other things have you been involved in the city of Riverside in terms of public service?
Sure, thank you, and good morning, everybody. I just got off a 7 a.m. call talking about similar things with a different group, but so I will rehash that again. That's right, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity, Dr. Carvalho, to speak to everybody, and just your interest in politics and local politics. I think people get completely wound up about presidential and national politics, but this is your local politics, your school boards, your water boards, your city council, and your mayor. That's where the rubber hits the road. So, and that's where I've worked in most of my space, has been in those areas. I've been on the school board for 9 years. I'm finishing up my second term. I was first elected in 2011. Prior to that, I was on the city planning commission for 5 years. My last is chairman. I was the only woman on a 9-member commission. That was interesting. That's for a whole nother Zoom call, though, I think. So we'll leave that there. And I served in 2 governor's administrations. I was an appointee under Governor Schwarzenegger and an appointee under Governor Brown on the California Board of Behavioral Sciences, which oversees all the mental health professionals in the state. So we oversaw over 100,000 licensed mental health professionals. And part of my priority in that position was to increase access to mental health services, particularly in our underserved and rural communities.
Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna ask you some questions about the board, and you were appointed by, so this is a good lead into my first question. You were appointed to this state board by a Republican governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, but then also by a Democrat governor, Jerry Brown, correct?
That's right.
Okay, so when you're out there knocking on doors, right, you're campaigning for mayor of Riverside, and you probably did this before when you're on the school board. You knock on a regular person's door, and this question probably comes up a lot. What party are you? And are you a Trump supporter? If yes, I love you, give me a hug, or if yes, I hate you, get out of my yard. You know, there's going to be people who are very, very polarized. So our students here are political science 1 students, and they just learned about the polarization of America, mostly because of the media, mostly because we're in an echo chamber in our own social media circles. We get a lot of our ideas from our parents, and we don't know, like, you know, how to disagree with someone, but also think of them as a good public servant. So when that question comes up, and you're not running as a Democrat or a Republican, you're running for a nonpartisan office, right? City offices are nonpartisan. We don't need to have half of the people in the city council to be a Democrat or be a Republican. But at the same time, you don't necessarily have to be an independent. You don't necessarily have to reject, you know, party politics and be like, I don't have an ideology. You do have an ideology. All of us do. So what is your answer to that voter who is very concerned about, you know, their number one thing is, are you a Trump supporter or not? And that's what's going to determine whether I vote for you. What do you tell them?
So those are all very good questions, and they are the environment we're operating in today. And it's unfortunate because you're right. We have nonpartisan political offices for a very good reason. And I always tell people, potholes aren't filled with red or blue asphalt. They're filled with asphalt, right? So the issues that you deal with as a city council person and in a school board, which is also nonpartisan, tend to be issues that don't require any kind of partisan leaning at all. One of the things I get asked a lot about is whether I'm pro-life or pro-choice.
Okay, why does that matter for someone who's trying to be the mayor of a city?
It doesn't, right? It doesn't. In my mind, it doesn't. And part of the calculus of that is that when people ask you that, they think if you answer a particular way, they can check all other boxes about what your beliefs are. And I don't know about you, but I don't fall into neat boxes. I may feel one way about, choice rights, and I may feel something completely different about something else. So one thing I get a lot of is I'm an environmental scientist. And so climate change is real to me, and human-induced causes of climate change is real. However, I'm a fiscal conservative. So I'm very much for smaller government and lower tax structures. Those are, if you're doing partisan politics, those two things are often at odds. So, and I'm a firm believer in they don't have to be at odds. And I think as a country, as a nation, as voters, we are often given a series of false choices like that. And they're not choices. They're not mutually exclusive. So you cannot base your vote on one aspect, one belief of somebody. It has to be well-rounded and researched, and somebody needs to reflect a plethora of your values, not just one thing. That's a tough sell, though, in this environment, I will say.
That's good. I personally identify as a liberal, but if you ask me, do I want to pay more taxes? No. Like, why can't we make do with what we have? We already pay enough county taxes and property taxes. And it just seems to me like government, local government in particular, is always asking for more. State government is always asking for more. And I'm wondering, why can't we make do, right? And some people might say, well, my wife always tells me, I want to pay more taxes if it's going to solve this problem and that problem and that problem. And I try to explain to her that, in my view, so this is the only place where we disagree, in my view, paying more taxes isn't going to solve those problems. More effective government will, right? Being smart about how we spend our money. So I agree with you. And then also we do have these single issue voters, right? Especially with the abortion thing. You're running for the mayor of a city. I mean, you can't overturn Roe versus Wade, even if you wanted to, and you can't legally close abortion clinics, even if you felt morally against them. And it's a non-issue. It's not an issue in a mayoral race, right? And you probably get a lot of questions like that. So let's talk a little bit about money, right? We're learning in our class that to run for anything, you need to have a little bit of money. So I'm going to ask you, I received some of your mailers here. So this is what we call a glossy, it's got your face on there, some information about you, your campaign. You're endorsed by the outgoing mayor and the former mayor of Riverside. And it's got a picture of your family. So first of all, and then I got this door hanger. What is your marketing scheme? Like, what do you want people to see when they open up one of these mailers? And then how much does it cost to send something like this to every voter in the biggest city in the Inland Empire? You're not running for mayor of Eastvale or even Norco, right, which has a way smaller population. You're running for the city of Riverside, where we have, 350,000 people within our borders, within our city limits. So how much does this cost? How do you produce it? And what is your marketing objective? What are you trying to get out of this?
Um, hmm. So the question is, what's the messaging, right? So the messaging, and what are you trying to get voters to see you as? I think our biggest things is that I have a record of results, that I get things done regardless of where I am. I'm a firm believer in you lead in any position you're in. And secondly, that I am endorsed by a broad cross section of people, and that I have what it takes to get the job done, which is why we have the two mayors on there, right? The two men that have previously had the job are endorsing me, not my opponent, who they've actually served with, right? So they know what it takes to get the job done. And instead of endorsing the fellow that's on council that they've worked with, they've chosen to go with me. They've worked with me on other things and think that I would do better at the job. So those kinds of things I think are important to get across to voters.
So an endorsement is a vote of confidence from a group of people or other candidates or elected officials. That's what an endorsement is. So answering the money question, how much does it cost to run for mayor in the biggest city in the Inland Empire, and how do you raise money?
So the first one you held up, not the door hanger, but the other one that you held up there, to go to all high propensity voters in the city of Riverside, that costs about $30,000 to send something like that out.
$30,000. So a high
30,000.
propensity voter is what kind of voter? And how do you know that they're high propensity?
We have a lot of information on you, right? We have a lot of politicians have access to a lot of information via the voter rolls.
But you don't know who I voted for. You know that I'm a high propensity voter. You know that I vote in every election, but
and I know your party affiliation.
You know my party affiliation, but you don't know if I've always voted for a Democrat or sometimes a Republican, or maybe for federal office, Democrat, local office, Republican. You don't know who anybody votes for because our vote is 100% private and personal. But you do know who votes, how often they vote, and their party affiliation. So that allows you to form a strategy, correct?
So there's a little over 100,000 voters in the city of Riverside. But if I were to send mailers to all of them, it would be a bit of a waste, right? Because not all of them vote. They're registered, but they don't vote. So what politicians do is we go to the voter rolls and see, okay, who's voted in the last, 4 out of 5 elections that we've had, particularly local elections, since this is a local race. And we identify those people, and that tends to be around 60% of the population. And that's who you target for your mailers. And that's who you target for your phone calls and your text messages and your everything else you guys are getting, ads on Instagram and Facebook. All of that goes to that group of people.
Okay. And then also you came to my house or my street. So I'm assuming that because I'm a high propensity voter, that's another thing that you don't want to waste your time knocking on doors of people that never vote. Even if they're friendly and nice and they're willing to talk to you.
That's right.
You only have so many hours on a weekend or whatever where you can campaign, and you're going to go through your list and you will go to people that you know that always vote, and that a personal visit might be helpful if they're undecided. Good. So let's talk about a little bit about your campaign and behind the scenes. Would you consider your campaign to be a grassroots organization? And how is this different than when you ran for school board? You're still endorsed by the press enterprise. So our local newspaper has given you a vote of confidence, and also the Riverside Unified School District Teachers Association. What is it, RTA?
RCTA.
They've endorsed you, and I mean, they know you better than anybody else as an entity that has worked with you, and they consider you a good enough candidate, and they've endorsed you. So what does a grassroots, if it is a grassroots organization, how do you get people to volunteer? How do you get people that know you to help out, like my neighbor Philip? And how is this different than running for school board?
There's a couple different questions in there. So let's start with how is it different from school board? It's not that much different, honestly. Campaign is a campaign. It's all about voter contact, keeping track of voters, having a well thought out, organized plan, and having a mailer schedule and a contact schedule. So everybody does that. Your issues are different, obviously, but they're not that different, right? You talk a lot about improving schools and educational access as a school board member, but as a mayor, you want to talk about making sure your community is educated and has access to jobs, right? So it's a lot of the same issues. The school district is actually larger than the city of Riverside. So we actually have almost twice as many employees as the city. We are the third largest employer in the county. We have 4,300 employees to the city's 2,500. So in some ways, for me, it's less complicated. You know, it's a little less challenging. When I ran for school board the first time, it was citywide, and it was larger than the city. Our boundaries are bigger. We're 92 square miles. The city's 81 square miles. So I've had experience running a citywide race. My last school board race, we were in trustee areas, which you may have talked about that in your class about going to the voter rights legislation that was passed. And so that was a smaller area. So it's cheaper. It's cheaper to run in a smaller area than it is. My budget for this was about $300,000. I'm already over by $100,000. So I've already raised $400,000 for this race. And I'm really cutting it close.
So you've raised almost $500,000 to get elected. So who wants to give a person? I mean, it didn't come from one donor, obviously.
Oh,
but,
if only that were the case. That would make it so much easier. I don't know any of the Koch brothers. So
except that it'd probably be illegal, right? To have that much money come from one person. It's like, why?
It's not illegal in Riverside. There is no campaign limits for the mayor's race.
So all I need to get elected is to have one rich friend that doesn't care about money.
Exactly.
Wow. I don't have any friends like that, but.
But to your point about the grassroots campaign, I have over 600 individual donations, more than that. And then I have some large donations from some large donors and some groups, right? So the Riverside Chamber of Commerce Political Action Committee gave me money. The teachers union did not. The firefighters did. And then people in the community gave me money. And I think my favorite donations are like the $5 and $10 donations because it's like a vote of confidence. I love those. So I get those too.
Right. I remember Bernie Sanders sending me emails, I need 79 cents. I'm like, what? I felt sorry for him, I'm like, I'll send you 79 cents, but like, you need a lot more money than that. But, I bring up Bernie Sanders because he was especially good at raising money from small donors, right? Their campaign did very, very well with just people sending in $5 or $3. And so he was never trying to overdo it by asking for big money, right? And he made it very clear he's not taking money from corporate donors. But in your situation, I mean, what is a corporate donor? If your interest is to bring business to Riverside and to make it a good environment for businesses tax-wise, why wouldn't you accept a donation from a large corporation, right? And then could someone argue that you're being bought by these big money interests that want to turn Riverside into something that it's not? I mean, could someone argue that?
Yes, and they can argue it from the union side of things too, right? And the party side of things. My opponent has gotten money from Planned Parenthood, which is, we talked about that, they really have no business being in local politics. So the question is, what are you beholden here to? Are you looking at future office? Is there something you're currying favor with the Democratic Party or the unions, And with business, it's the same thing, right? You're asked, well, you're taking money from the chamber. Oh, you must be bought and sold and in the back pocket of businesses. And that's not true. Not if you're a good and skilled politician, it's not. Because you're still focusing on the people and what's good for the city. And it's all about balancing those issues. And sometimes you run the risk of alienating and ticking off your donors. And that's just what you have to do, right?
Right.
I made a decision when I was on the Planning Commission 11 years ago that a big donor in the city here will not give me money because she never forgot about the decision I made.
Wow.
So you run that risk, but that's you you better be willing to do the right thing, because you have to, at the end of the day, stand behind it and sleep at night and know that you're not doing somebody else's bidding. You're doing the people's bidding.
So you've ran a few campaigns. How do you learn? How do you learn how to campaign? Who taught you about high propensity voters and the information that's available through the county registrar of voters? Like, how did you get your feet wet with the little things that you need to do, like how to produce something like this? Uh, the effectiveness of door hangers versus a flyer that could get lost. Um, who, like, did you hire a consultant? Because I know those people exist and they charge a lot of money. Did you have friends that got you into local politics? Like, how do you learn something like this?
So two things. First, I joined a women's leadership organization called California Women Lead, because I wanted to know what it was like to actually walk the walk, talk the talk. And this was before I ran or got appointed to anything. I knew that their main focus was to get more women into elected office. So I got involved in there, and I had training. They helped me get an appointment with the governor's office. So that was one aspect of that. And then the other thing was I started volunteering on campaigns. So, and in fact, the first campaign I volunteered for was my opponent's campaign. I ran his ground game. I did his voter outreach on the ground. My husband and I did, so as volunteers. That's really a good way to find out. It's almost like an apprenticeship, right? You're in there with people that are doing it, and you learn by the rope. You learn the ropes that way.
So, so speaking of that, you mentioned this women's leadership organization that got you into politics. Can you talk a little bit more about specifically women's issues, and if there is a perception that local politics, or at least in Riverside, politics are like a good old boys club and patriarchal, and I mean, I don't know how feminist you are. I definitely look at that because I have a daughter and I have female students, and I care about that. I care about more women in Congress. Why does it have to be 85% male and white? I look at who's in our state legislature. I look at who our governors are. I was deeply disappointed that we had a chance to elect a female president and we didn't. So I do look at this because to me, it's a progression of suffrage, which can only be good for a democracy, right? That we've come this far. And other countries have already elected female prime ministers, like in the 80s. We're behind schedule here in breaking breaking that door open. So what is it like to be the second female mayor should you get elected, and then you're going to be working in a situation where there's going to be men? And have they played that card? Have they played have they tried to make you look like, oh, you're just running on the female, the I'm a woman card? Has that issue come up at all?
It hasn't, because I haven't played that card. And I'm the mother of 3 girls. So, and it's women's leadership is very important to me, and it has been instilling it in my daughters. I am also a wildlife biologist and a former park ranger. So I have worked as a woman in traditionally male dominated fields my whole life. So I have felt that sting of sexism off and on over the years. And I did mention that I was the lone female on a 9-member planning commission. I was treated fairly rudely when I got on there by one individual in particular who was older. And by the time I left, my 5th year, he had voted me in as chairman. So, and why? Why is that the case? Because I haven't made being a woman an issue. It's never been an issue for me. I really stick to issues that we're dealing with. Like For example, this guy on the planning commission, he'd take pot shots at me on the dais. He'd say things like, you know, shouldn't you be home with your daughters? Or shouldn't you? He'd really literally say stuff like that. And I would say, thank you, Commissioner X. Now what are we going to do about this issue? And I just moving on. And I think sometimes if you're that way, you just have to just not engage. Or if you do engage, you better make sure if you shoot for the king, you're going to kill him, right? Because it's a pretty big hill to die on. And I think just the reason there aren't more women in politics is it's a very mean game. It's mean, and I'm not saying men are mean, but I think men are normalized and acculturated to be more competitive from a very early age and to kid around with each other and be negative, and but it's in a way that they get back up again and keep moving, and as women we're taught to keep everybody happy from an early age. And it's difficult because you can't do that as a politician.
Right. So I just have a few more questions, and then we'll open it up to see if the students have any questions. So how do you know you're winning? Like, the presidential election, they do polls, right? And sometimes the polls are accurate, kind of accurate, or they have a margin of error that is acceptable. They're scientific polls, unscientific polls. Even Senate races or congressional races might also pay someone to conduct a poll. They're very costly, right, at the local level. But how do you get a feel for, people have already started voting. People already got their ballots in the mail. Is there a way to track that early voting? And then is there a way to predict in any sort of scientific way how you're doing leading up to election day? Or is it kind of like, surprise, you're the mayor of Riverside? I mean, how do you know? How do you gauge that?
Absent polls, it's very difficult. But you really have nothing. You can get all. As a politician, you're generally living in a bubble. You're hearing from people that like you, that want you to win. So you're like, yeah, I got this. I'm gonna win. And then, there's like 1,000 other people who don't like you. So you only find out at the polls that night. It's probably the most stressful night that you can you can have. Yes, in higher ticket races, you generally do polling. And if we had $20,000, we would probably do a poll, but I don't have an extra $20,000 lying around. But we saw with the last presidential campaign how treacherous even those can be, right? Everybody was, Hillary Clinton was really the odds were on her that she was going to win. And it didn't, sorry, and she didn't win. So I'm a scientist, so I understand statistics and I understand statistical sampling. And I know that the farther out you are from an event, the more difficult it is to predict. The closer you get to the event, the more, and I know you know this, Dr. Kabbalah, the polls become more accurate. And I do think in the days leading up to Hillary Clinton's, like Nate Silver's 538, we're predicting her to lose. So it all depends, I guess. It's a surprise. It's the worst Christmas ever.
Well, we wish you the best, but once you're in there, right? I think the number one thing most people want to know about right now is, as mayor, how will you handle the COVID crisis, which is not going away? It is affecting businesses. Look at the way we're doing school. The Riverside Unified is probably going through the same thing. There's some important decisions that need to be made in regards to how to handle that situation. It has gotten political. I've been reading, in the press enterprise, how the county supervisors want to go on record as saying, this is anti-business. We're against the governor. But you're a scientist. You understand science. You also understand businesses. You're on the school board. You understand the gap of learning, what we're calling learning losses. You understand all that. So with all that experience, how will you handle this issue as mayor of Riverside?
This is a really good question, because this is another one of those false choices we're being given as a society. It's not an either or proposition. It's not that you're a masker or an anti-masker, or you're pro-business or you're pro-people. Unfortunately, the polarization that occurs around these issues makes it very difficult as an elected person to make decisions. But this is where true leadership comes in. This is the definition of leadership. You're being given imperfect information and inadequate information, and you are making life and death choices. That's what we're doing as elected officials. I'm a firm believer that this is going to be around for a while. You know, it's here to stay. And I read a statistic the other day, something that 60% of the businesses that are going out of business right now are never coming back. People are hurting. They're hurting, and our economy is hurting too. We better figure out a way to navigate, right? And if that means wearing masks, get the hell over it. Wear a mask. You know, I mean, if you want our economy to come roaring back, you've gotta be able to be. I'm just a very practical person. I do what works, and so we are really going to have to get things back up and running. And we're doing that at the school district right now. In fact, I just toured 3 classrooms yesterday. We have plastic shields up, have protocols in place now. We're probably going to send our students back on November 9th for elementary and November 30th for secondary. So we'll see.
Well, we'll see how that goes. Okay, so I don't know if we're running out of time. Usually they give me a timer that says you got 10 minutes because we have 40 minutes. But anyway, we'll open it up right now to the students. I will unmute you all if you care to ask a question. Here's your opportunity to talk to a candidate for mayor in the biggest city in the Inland Empire. And yeah, maybe I should offer extra credit. I don't know, maybe. Yeah, we could work that out. We'll work that out. But is there any observations or comments that anyone has? I will unmute you. Just try to keep it brief if you can. Okay, you've all been unmuted. I think. No. Why can we unmute the people that want to be unmuted? Okay, does anybody have a question for Patricia Locke Dawson?
I have a question.
Yes. Go ahead, we can hear you.
I think I'm having a problem with my. Okay, I don't know if you can hear me now, but so my question is regarding homelessness. What would you do differently to address the situation or the homeless problem? And where would you get those funds from?
Good question. Homelessness increased from 2018 to 2019, 30%, and from 19 to 20, another 33%. And it's only going to get worse after the pandemic. So I agree with you. The city has not had a regional plan in place to address homelessness that works with our surrounding cities and works with the state and the federal government to get the resources that we need. I have worked at all levels of government. I know how the legislature works, and I know how to get things done in government. So that is something I bring to the table. I'm the only candidate who's actually gotten legislation passed and brought money to our region. So I have that. Something the city has not done, and I'll try to condense this as much as I can, is been more surgical in their application of resources to the various populations that are homeless. We know, 18% suffer from addiction, 14% have mental illness, another 20%, are struggling with physical disabilities. We know the fastest rising group of homeless people are single women over 50. Fully 30% of the people who became homeless for the first time this last year. As a scientist, to me, that gives me a roadmap that tells me where I need to put my resources and in what proportion. But I also need to look at the various levels of government and see what's coming from what. Federal government is funding for services and housing. Regional government provides the services. So you need to be able to look at the different levels of government and what mechanisms you have within each one of those that you can pull the trigger on and advocate for. So to sum it up, I think we need better prevention and better exit strategies for keep people from losing their homes. And when they have lost their homes or jobs or become addicted or been incarcerated, we need to give them better strategies to get back on their feet.
And it's also a county problem, right? The county needs to step up. And obviously Riverside being the biggest city in the county, you're going to have a higher number of homeless people. But how do do we know where they're coming from? Do we know if they're coming from neighboring cities? I mean, the county has resources, right? Especially in the mental health area. And how are we using those resources to help those people? But yeah, we have seen the problem getting worse in our city. Okay, do we have another question? Do we have another question from another student? And thank you. Was it 3T2AQS? Good question. All right. Anybody else have a question?
I have a question.
Okay.
How did you gain political standing when first starting to join into politics? Like, what routes or paths do you have to take to get just like noticing your voice out to get in the positions that you've gotten to?
That's a really good question. When you're first starting out, right? How do you gain credibility? How do you get people to listen to you?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways to do that is through endorsements. And if you can convince somebody of prominence in this, whatever area you're running in to get behind you, that helps increase your stature so people will listen. That person can be your champion. It's very difficult when you're coming fresh into an office versus being an incumbent, because incumbents have that standing and they have people who have a vested interest in ensuring that person stays in office. So when you're fresh coming in, you have to work hard to get people to believe you and have people take a risk on you. And one of the ways you can do that is through an established track record of work or other community service. I've long been involved in volunteering and serving our community outside of any kind of public office that I've had. So people knew me from that too.
And there's a lot of opportunities for that, right? To volunteer in different committees, city planning committee, parks and recs committee. I mean, there's things where citizens can just get involved and meet people in the city who care about those issues or care about the community they live in. And the younger you start out, the better, right? Because you could prove a track record of serving your community. And a lot of that is volunteering your time, right? And a lot of people don't want to do that. Okay, do we have we have time for one more question. Hopefully I don't think we'll get cut off, but because
I have a question, if
Yeah.
that's okay. What made you change your career path from being a scientist to wanting to run to where you're at right now?
Good question. Good question. I was a good wildlife biologist, but I was a better policymaker. And I found that in my job, I worked for the federal government as a wildlife biologist. I was running an endangered species program for the Bureau of Land Management. And I kept getting dragged into policy discussions, and people kept asking me, could I help develop a policy for this or direction for that? And I was like, oh, okay. More effective doing that. And I wouldn't necessarily say I enjoyed it more, because I felt I could be more effective, than just doing the work that I was doing. And I was very motivated by environmental quality and environmental change and climate change and wanting to make a difference there. And unfortunately, a lot of times people don't listen to science.
Okay.
You know, you can be like slaving away in your cubicle, or transfer to the level of decision making. It's all for naught. So we need more scientists in public office, I think.
Okay. And are there any other questions?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Peter.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm not sure if this is exactly the position for you to say, but I just want to know what are your stance on gun conservation and owning a gun, and if you are elected as mayor, what would you intend to do about gun laws in the area?
This is another one of those questions I get asked a lot that the mayor has no control over, honestly. Very little control over, right? It's a constitutional right, gun ownership in our country. There's very little a mayor could do. There's very little state legislatures can do. They can limit the types of guns. They can, limit the types of ammo and put controls in place for background checks and all that kind of thing. But it's a right in our country to own a gun. And one of the things that I will say is, going back to Professor Carvalho's comment in the beginning, sometimes I don't like to answer these questions because I have no control over it as a mayor. And whatever I say will immediately turn off or disenfranchise a bunch of people that don't agree with me, right? Which then keeps me from getting elected to do the real work of a mayor, the stuff that you have to do as a mayor. So I tend to try to not talk about these things that I have no control over or can't impact, because I want to get elected and do the job of the mayor.
Well, if
If that answers
the
your question.
if the city of Riverside, if the city council wanted to pass an ordinance, a gun ordinance, right, that doesn't conflict with a state law or federal law, they probably could. But we need to understand that in the system that we have in the city of Riverside, other cities do it differently, where the mayor has more power. The only power that the mayor of Riverside has, and this is just because of how the city charter was set up and organized, you have the power to veto certain things, right? But you don't have any more power. You wouldn't have any more power than a regular city council member. Like, you can't introduce city ordinances or proclaim or you don't really have a lot of executive powers. Whereas other mayors, like the mayor of LA, he could do that. He could pass a city ordinance, banning certain guns or certain weapons. He would have that power, and he could, probably get support from the city council. But in the city of Riverside, the way that our charter was set up, the mayor is a little bit more ceremonial, correct?
Mayor has veto power. That's about it. So in the city of Riverside, you're right. Which means not necessarily ceremonial, because the mayor does set policy for the city. It's supposed to be in the charter. It states that the mayor is sort of the lead policy maker for the city, sets vision. And that's where your political skill comes in handy, right? Your ability to build coalitions, your ability to use the bully pulpit, your ability to use personal diplomacy to get people on board so that you can work with those who have a vote to get things enacted, right? So that's why you need that skill in a mayor in Riverside.
What's it like to be running as a candidate during this COVID crisis? And when did you decide that you were going to pursue this? And you ran before for other things. Has this been easier or harder?
It has been challenging. It really has. Who knew when I threw my hat in the ring last August for this? This was August of 19, where I wanted to attack homelessness, jobs, and economy, and housing and quality of life. that a year later I would be looking at racial justice issues, police reform, a global pandemic, and just civil unrest, right? All of those things. So all that stuff's been thrown into the mix now. And you got to be quick on your feet to be able to address all that stuff. You got to be smart. You got to be strategic. But you also have to be clever to figure out how to navigate. Nobody's navigated running a campaign in this before. Nobody alive today has ever run a campaign in a global pandemic. So he who or she who successfully figures out how to reach voters, how to go through all those things is the one who's going to prevail. So got to figure it out. And my comment to that is, if you can't, you have no business being mayor. So.
Right, because we don't know what other challenges will be in the future. They
Exactly.
may be equally, you might have an equal crisis, hopefully not. But speaking of, you brought up the, racial injustice. I was at the Black Lives Matters protest in downtown Riverside back in June. And, I don't know if these were local people or not local people, but thousands of people converged in downtown Riverside, and there was a heavy police presence and the sheriffs and they blocked off the historic courthouse. Yeah, I was mostly there just as a bodyguard for my daughter and my niece. But I think this would fall under the purview of being the mayor of Riverside, because Mayor Rusty Bailey was tweeting about it, or he was on Instagram and posting about it and saying that protesters are welcome. The nonviolent protesters are welcome in the city of Riverside, and it mostly was nonviolent. As mayor, how would you handle a situation like that? You would have you do have oversight over the police department and the police chief. So what would be your directive to deal with a protest that big and the possibility of having that many people come into downtown Riverside?
I think one of the probably highest priorities of a mayor would be to ensure the safety and security of his or her residents, right? The citizens of Riverside. So I thought we did a pretty good job there. Yeah, there was a really heavy police presence. I'm not sure that's what did it, though. I think we benefited from seeing what happened in Santa Monica, and I think we were ready for it, which meant limiting access to certain streets, and that kept everybody in one area. And then people were really well behaved in the sense that they were just there to express their opinions. I was part of it too. I was there too. So this is America. This is democracy. I may sound like a Pollyanna, but that's what this is about. We come together as a country like this when we see something wrong and we get to express our opinions. Boy, you better, as an elected official, embrace that. You better, because that's what this country was built. You wouldn't be in office if it hadn't been for people before you that had done just such a thing and threw a bunch of boxes of tea over the bow in Boston Harbor. So I truly believe that it's absolutely the right of the people to get together like that. Having said that, we need to keep everybody safe. And I think our police chief did a great job with our sheriff's department in coordinating where we didn't need to call in anybody else. We had sufficient resources here, which I thought they did a good job at. And I think there were some people who, were angry and wanted to cause some trouble, which we cracked down on pretty quickly, but because of safety for other people.
Okay, I have one final question, unless somebody else has one.
Thank you, Danielle. That's very nice.
If someone else doesn't have a question, I will ask my final question.
I have a question.
Okay.
Do personal rivalries and egos get in the way of how the community is being run?
Personal rivalries, like like if I had enemies out in the community and people that I didn't like, is that what you're talking about?
No, at your level.
Your opponent.
Yes.
And reframe the question now that, can you rephrase it again now that I understand what you're saying?
Do personal rivalries and egos get in the way of how the community is being run?
So I think what Angelica's saying is, once you're never going to agree with everybody on the city council, and there's going to be people who are personally opposed to you and your views. How do you deal with that in order to just run the city as mayor?
I see. I'm sorry, Angelica. I didn't understand what your question was. So thank you, Professor Carvalho, and thanks for the question. Of course, humans are humans, right? We let things get in the way. But I will say, this is where my training as a scientist comes in handy, honestly, is I am really able to put aside my personal feelings about things. And I know that sounds crazy and you may not believe me, but I don't come into a situation already decided on something. And I also don't think because you disagree with me or you have a different opinion from me that you're evil or you're bad or I can't work with you. Ask my colleagues on the planning commission. If that were the case, I never would have survived, right? So you have to be able to, one, assume good intentions of the other person. So somebody may be saying something that you don't agree with, but it's probably coming from a good place. It's probably coming from a belief that they have, right? So you have to honor that and validate that. And secondly, when you do that and you see that, okay, you think this, I think this, you have to be able to frame a question where you can both agree on a common goal. So you may be saying this and you may be saying this, but what you're really saying is here, and let's focus on that. And let's try to not let externalities affect the problem we're trying to solve and sticking to the issue. So I did that with my colleagues on the school board as well. We've had some very big differences of opinion on there, and we've managed to work through them. You have to be able to rise above that. You can't be petty and small. You'll never survive in this business. That's a good question. Thank you.
And the people who are your opponents today or your frenemies might be more of a friend later on. You might be able to work with them on an issue that is important to both of you later on in the future, and you don't know that. But
that's the truth. That's happened.
And then the people that are your friends today, or you thought were your friends, they might do something that you're against in the future. So you're not married to these people. You just work with them to make policies that benefit the most people most of the time, right? That would be the goal. So
I think, can I say one other thing, Professor? I think too, I know people say this all the time and it is meaningless, but not to take it personally. You can't think it's somebody disagrees with you because they think you're a bad person or they hate you. You have to think, you have to think that they're just motivated by their own concerns and their own issues. So it's not about you, it's about them and what their desires and their goals are.
Right, and this is hard to do in today's world of social media, where a lot of people have most of their political arguments, right? Because you can't see their good intentions, and you can't see how honest they are being, or if they're being sarcastic, or if they are being condescending. You just read the text, and this person is opposed to what you're saying, and you might go back and forth, and you so quickly we come to the conclusion, yes, I hate this person because they don't know what they're talking about, and they're ignorant, or they're uninformed, or they don't care about America, or they hate the city of Riverside. Whatever it is, it's so easy in social media to get caught up with all the negativity of politics. But you're running because you appreciate the role of government in making policy and in helping your community and in serving your community. But to get there, you have to be part of the ugliness of it, right? And to me, it seems like a lot of self-promotion. And a lot of people have a problem doing that, right? Like talking about their accomplishments and talking about how great they are, or talking about how much better they are than the other person. A lot of self-promotion and a lot of negative, defending yourself from attacks, and just you see the worst, the worst part of people's personalities during an election year. I've personally snoozed, Facebook allows you to snooze people. I've snoozed people when I knew there were 30 days left before the election. Those people that are always posting things from both sides, right? Liberals and conservatives. I just don't want to see it. I don't have time for that. I want to enjoy the process of voting and democracy and the difference of opinions between people, the difference in policies. And I just can't get caught up in that. It would be a waste of time, right? So yeah, there's a lot of negativity. A lot of people don't understand that. So having said that, the negativity involved in politics, the what you have to go through to get there. We have young people here who are learning about politics and are also voters, right? And we know that young people between the ages of 18 to 25 don't vote as much as a group, as much as people who are older. So what's your final message to a young voter who might be cynical, maybe not about the race in Riverside, but they look at what's going on with President Trump and with fake news and with all the negativity that's involved in a presidential election, all of the insults, and then a lot of people just get turned off from voting, right? Young people might say, you know what? I don't got time for this. This is, I just want to listen to music and be happy, or do things that are positive for me, right? Too much negative energy out there. How can you draw young people to be consistent voters, or to be engaged, or to care?
Oh, that's a big question. First, I did want to respond to Peter had a comment about, he asked about scientists going into political office, and there aren't a whole lot of them. There's not a whole lot of us that do it. There is actually a party of technocracy that advocates for scientists in public office. So I don't know if Professor Carvalho knows about that, but the idea that scientists are the better decision makers because we don't let emotion get in the way. So no, not a whole lot of them. Thank you for that. It's interesting. So in terms of getting young people engaged, I think you just have to ask yourself, one of the things I hear from people is, younger people is, I don't know enough, which I call BS on. I think you know what's important to you, and that's enough. That's enough, right? That's enough to know what issues impact you. Also, people my age are creating a world that you're growing old into. You're going to have to live with our decisions, right? So I think if you don't want to live in a world, where you can't go to the desert, or or Florida is underwater, or throw whatever you want out there, you have to get involved, because otherwise you won't be able to listen to your music and hang out with your friends, right? You've got to be able to be apprised of the issues that impact you. I think getting involved in a political campaign is a good way to do that. If it's not a person you can get behind, if there's an issue you can get behind, if it's something you care deeply about, you can volunteer. If you are interested in government in general, you can seek to be appointed to a board or commission. That's a good place to start. I want to do that actually as mayor. I want to have a student board member on our boards and commissions. We have 30 some odd boards and commissions in the city. It would be so good to have a young person to be able to give us direction on those boards. So I think you just have to keep in mind that that's a big, it's a big world out there, that and a big future that you have control over with your vote. It's very important, very important. And I will finish with this little story, which I think is kind of fun. The first time my oldest daughter got to vote, when she turned 18, she got to cast her ballot for me. Pretty cool. She was able to mark her ballot for her mom. That could be you guys someday, right? You could be doing that too. So it's a pretty neat experience. I'll just leave it with that. And you guys are really lucky to have a professor like Dr. Carvalho who gives you all these ideas and opportunities. That's very cool. It has such a deep understanding
Thank you. And
of
it's
problems.
it's been challenging. You know, this is actually the first time we've been together synchronously in the whole semester because our class is asynchronous and, you know, not everybody has the same schedule. The class was supposed to be at 11 and not everybody can do that. We can't meet in the evenings because people might have other classes. But I think we're going to make it work, students, and hopefully we're moving along. And we really, really appreciate you coming and speaking with us, Patricia Locke Dawson. You're running for mayor of Riverside, the biggest city in the Inland Empire. The election day is in a couple of weeks, but the ballots are already in the mail. If someone wanted to get involved in your campaign for the remainder of the you know, from now until the election, how could they do that?
Thank you for that plug. You can go to patriciaforriverside.com.
Let me type it up here. Patricia for Riverside.com.
Or you can email me too at patricia@patriciaforriverside.com. So
Okay, very
either one of
good.
those is good.
If anybody's looking for an opportunity to get involved, or they need, you know, volunteer service hours or extra credit, I don't know, we can work that out. We could definitely work that out. But we really appreciate you taking the time, helping us learn about local politics and helping us learn about the behind the scenes. And I think everything we covered is really, really valuable information. And we wish you the best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your time. And thanks for making a world that I can grow old into, too. So appreciate it.
Well, hopefully,
Thanks.
yeah, hopefully we have a better planet, you know, leave it in a better way than you found it. Right?
I think I have a lot of confidence in this generation. They really have been passionate, and I think you're kind, and I think you're tolerant in a lot of ways that people my age are not. So thank you.
Yeah, so do I. I'm always amazed. You know, we think that young people are apathetic and indifferent and they don't care. But I'm always pleasantly surprised every semester when I work with these students. It's just a matter of, you know, getting them interested and engaged, and then they do the rest, right? They do the rest for us. So I'm very happy that I love my job. And thank you so much for your time. And once again, we wish you luck.
Thanks, guys. Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Bye-bye. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us.